Hello, people of the internet. My name is Shady Shadow. Unfortunately, this is going to be a video in which deals with a very serious situation that has clamored itself amongst us rather frequently anymore. A man who had his entire plan spewed amongst many controversial websites and will not judge whether or not you feel as though those are controversial or not as far as the sites are concerned. Some people have different viewpoints about the sites that this guy ended up posting his manifesto on, and yeah, that is something that we're not going to be a judge on here. But this is going to be a video that goes into a particular name that was brought up, and I'm pretty sure people know who we're talking about here. But the suspect, which we're not going to tell you the name of because we don't want to give him celebrity status, and yeah, we're gonna get to that in just a second as well. He ended up going into two mosques in the city of Christchurch and shot 50 people, and some have paid the ultimate price because of that. Unfortunately, this is something that is quite commonplace here in America anymore, and I'm one of those types of people who really don't care what side of the political spectrum you are on. This is something that affects us all. It doesn't really matter what branch of politics this guy was subscribed to, because as you will see in just a second, it probably doesn't really matter because he probably just did this for the attention. He had a manifesto in which we're not going to get into more or less. He did cite a couple of really ominous names. The President of the United States, Donald Trump, as one of them. He did cite Candace Owens, who is a controversial right-wing commentator. And there are other people such as Ben Shapiro. We know who he is. But then, in a very interesting, in the worst way possible, twist, before he went out and did his deed, said a very popular meme that has garnered the attention of several people in the past couple of months. The words that were uttered by the guy was, "Subscribe to PewDiePie." Now, if you do not know what this meme has to do about, Felix Kjellberg, otherwise known as PewDiePie, has probably one of the most popular channels on YouTube, if not the most popular one. He was recently scared that T-Series, which is a overseas music channel, which is one of those types of channels like Vivo or whatever, which YouTube tends to have a preference to when protecting them from things like copyright claims and what have you, was going to surpass him. In that sense, it would mean that independent media on YouTube would be in danger because people would think that we would want more of that processed stuff that you keep seeing on YouTube anymore, as opposed to independent journalism and media and stuff like that. The whole movement of subscribe to PewDiePie was in order to get people to make sure that he stayed at the top of the YouTube subscriber echelon. That way, people would be more aware that independent media needs to thrive on YouTube. Now, of course, knowing who PewDiePie is, he also has a lot of people who will just sprout that just because it's a thing to do. However, there is a bit of a dark thing to this. If you do not remember what caused the apocalypse on YouTube that happened in the first place, it is because the Wall Street Journal tried to post a hit piece on PewDiePie. And knowing how the mainstream public decides to take anything the mainstream media publishes as absolute gospel of truth, they decided to buy into this, in which they said that PewDiePie was anti-Semitic because of a few choice videos that he posted. One of those videos that they tried to say was proof of this was actually him saying that the media takes him out of context. The Wall Street Journal, which is owned by Rupert Murdoch of News Corp, take that into consideration when you're believing anything the Wall Street Journal tells you, essentially took him out of context on a video in which he is talking about people taking him out of context. How's that for irony? Unfortunately, the people who already had a problem with him because, well, he's a YouTuber and he has said some things against outrage culture before outrage culture became quite cool to do, and because, you know, we have to bow down to print media anymore instead of the independent scene in which people can basically say whatever they want as long as it's not breaking any kind of laws, and they don't have to conform to any middleman who's telling them, hey, you have to confide to sponsorships and not have to take any bit of sponsored content, and you have to disclose anything that you do take. Somehow that doesn't sit well with some people, more or less ResetEra and those people like that. So they, went and attacked him. And of course, we all know what he did later on in that year, the whole N-bomb drop that he did on a PUBG stream that he did. All those times he had immediately apologized, but in this day and age, you know the drill. People just want to hold a black cloud over your head on any kind of mistake you do. It is as if they are just waiting for the moment that you do any kind of mistake, you walk on any kind of eggshell whatsoever in order to pounce, and they will overblow anything you do. It doesn't matter how small it is, or how much you try to apologize, or how much you try to distance yourself from a particular thing. They are going to make sure they put you back into that box if you try to get out of it. So you know how this kind of stuff works. And anybody who tries to defend him, or anybody who gets put into this box, is also put into the box with them. They don't even try to listen to anybody. They don't care. They have a vested interest, unless the media do, to make sure that anybody who threatens their place at the top is taken down, and they will go and stoop to any low they feel is necessary in order to reach that goal. Keep in mind that the media hated PewDiePie even before any of this began, and it might be the reason the Wall Street Journal tried to find something against him in the first place, because he is taking away their ad revenue and their market share, because people do see that the YouTube gaming scene is actually winning over the trust of people, because they do see print media and the mainstream media as bowing down to corporate greed. Keep that in mind, as you probably are already seeing several people trying to say that this is the link that people have been waiting for, that PewDiePie is automatically linked to the shooter in question. No research given, no kind of second thought to that matter. It is just, okay, the shooter said his name, so yeah, PewDiePie is automatically linked by proxy, because he made a few mistakes in the past. And may the Lord help you if you try to do anything, even in the slightest, to either defend him or try to say that it was any other way. It can be no other way according to them. Of course, PewDiePie immediately went on Twitter and posted this, quote, "Just heard news from the devastating reports from New Zealand Christchurch. I feel absolutely sickened having my name uttered by this person. My heart and thoughts go out to the victims, families, and everyone affected by this tragedy." Now, before we go any further into his place in this whole controversy, let me first bring up the whole idea of thoughts and prayers. Yes, that is a cliche thing anymore, and yes, politicians do use that in place of being responsible for doing anything about this sort of thing. They don't try to pass any laws to make sure that people who shouldn't have guns get guns. They don't try to close any loopholes, and of course, the mainstream people tend to buy into the rhetoric that the press tries to feed them whenever this subject gets brought up. Again, no research given, no research done. It is as if we've become the most laziest people we've ever seen. They don't want to do any research, and I cannot understand why or how to get them to do anything other than believe whatever the media tells them. How lazy can you get? However, normal people like you or me, there's not much that you can do outside of that. You might be able to donate money, and yes, there are some fundraisers out there in order to help the victims, and I will try to post the links below in the description below this video. But outside of that, and maybe volunteer work locally, there's not much else you can do to help the victims of this particular shooting. There's not much that can be done other than telling people, hey, we are thinking about you. We're hoping that this is not as bad as it's looking, and it is very bad. And hopefully that is enough in order to make sure that you know that at least we're sympathetic of the situation. I think that whole idea that, hey, we're tired of thoughts and prayers is more aligned to the politicians who don't want to do anything to make sure stuff like this doesn't ever happen again, and not toward the general public who, outside of a couple of things, isn't really equipped to do much else about what can be done on the politics side. So there you go. There's my thoughts about the whole thing. Now let's get to the meat of this whole thing, the PewDiePie reference. First thing is first, let's get to the easy part first, because a lot of people, what they are doing on Twitter right now, they are saying that the few names that were mentioned are not at fault, which is Donald Trump, Candace Owens, and then PewDiePie. Those three names seem to come together in many tweets I've seen. Now there is this mindset that's going around that they're not directly pulling the trigger, however they are influencing the people to go and do stuff like this. And that is a lot of gray area that you have to go through in order to get to that conclusion. Now, are there people out there that can influence and have influenced people to do stuff like this? Absolutely. And I can argue that perhaps the President of the United States has influenced people to that point. Maybe, and I would hope, not intentionally. And I would give the benefit of the doubt there. I would hope, and that's just me saying I hope, that that is not an intentional act. However, one of those things doesn't belong. You can say Candace Owens is a controversial figure, and I don't know that much about her in order to make a judgment one way or the other. I do know that people have said that she has said some pretty controversial and pretty questionable things. However, I am not that versed of anything that she has said outside of the social autopsy thing that she wanted to do a few years ago, and I've covered that before. However, it is PewDiePie that doesn't belong in that group. Even if you are saying that the rest of those people do not have any influence on whether or not someone decides to pull a trigger in a mosque. You can probably say that Donald Trump is a hateful human being. And yes, I'll get to the reasons why we have to keep this in mind in just a moment, because this whole notion of the killer saying his name in the first place is a tactic that he used in order to incite division within us. And yeah, we're falling for it anyway because we have our own agendas, and you're gonna see in just a second why that's so dangerous right now. But PewDiePie does not belong in the same group as people like Donald Trump. He does not belong in that same kind of group. Maybe you can make a case for Ben Shapiro to not belong in that group. Maybe you can make a case like that, but definitely not with PewDiePie. If you've watched any of his content outside of what the Wall Street Journal tries to report to you, or get out of the echo chamber that is ResetEra, then you will see that he is probably one of the most caring people you'll ever meet. People have had meetings with him, and they have all said that he is probably one of the nicest guys around. Does he always have his head on straight? Of course not. None of us do. I've made mistakes in my life. I've said some things that I would rather take back. I've done some things that were questionable at times. You know why? Because we're human. We are human beings. We are allowed to make mistakes. We are allowed to try to recover from them. And if we never let somebody recover from their mistakes, if we always try to cancel one another, which is a word that has spewed about things recently, then we're never going to get better as a society, because we're always going to be at each other's throats, because we're always going to be holding grudges against one another. And that's going to lead to stuff like this. But I guess I said the other point already. There have been several people who have gone on Twitter after he said this, and after people like Boogie and Nerdgasm and Philip DeFranco, in myself included, people have started to say, no, you are responsible because of what you have said. But let's get into, again, what he has said. Let's get into, again, the things that people have cited, which is the N-bomb drop that he did in, I believe it was 2017, or the whole issue with the Wall Street Journal. You can go back on my channel, you can watch those videos again. You can see that I reported things rather accurately, that the Wall Wall Street Journal took a video out of context in which he said people were taking him out of context. They had every thought in mind when they did that. But moreover to that, the reason in the first place why this killer did this, why he included PewDiePie's name, is because he didn't like him. So he wanted people to lump him in to what he was doing. He wanted to link him to this hatred, this vile, senseless act of hatred and anti-Semitism in the worst possible way. And you know what we did? Not only did we as people fell for it because he did this in the first place, because he spouted a popular meme, which he could have said any old meme and it would have had just as much impact. He could have said anything and it would not make any difference. But what he did, what this man did, was to show us in the most sickening way that we have learned absolutely nothing. Not only did the media pounce on this and say that PewDiePie is responsible because they already have a hatred toward him because of him taking away the market share from their content. So is this their sick way of saying, hey, we told you so, we told you so, we told you so, when we fell for their stuff long before this happened, and they're just using this to further their agenda against PewDiePie and not even realizing or caring to realize that the reason why the guy referenced him in the first place is because he hates PewDiePie. He wants PewDiePie to suffer. That's the whole point of it. That's the reason why he did this in the first place. And we're falling for it when we're trying to defend PewDiePie, because he said the people that were mentioned in this manifesto are not responsible. It was the shooter that was responsible. However, keep this in mind that while PewDiePie just made a few errors, a few mistakes, and he immediately tried to correct himself, and the only reason why he can't get out of this black cloud is because we won't let him, Donald Trump has continuously shown that he has a problem with his politics and with this national emergency because of the wall that he wants, and that travel ban and stuff like that, and his words, his clumsy words at the wake of the Charlottesville massacre by saying, hey, these people are not responsible, it was a shooter. We're not only shown that we are siding with PewDiePie, saying we are absolving PewDiePie of any fault, they're also seeing that we might be saying that we have also absolved Donald Trump of any fault because he didn't influence the shooter either, or Candace Owens. So now the killer has not only linked PewDiePie, tried to link PewDiePie to this, but now when we try to defend him, we have to be careful about how we defend PewDiePie, because we have to, first of all, separate PewDiePie from people like Donald Trump who might actually have influenced this person. So that has to be carefully dissected as well. Do you see now why this killer linked PewDiePie in the first place? He wanted his entire reputation to be destroyed, and the media is more than happy to do his work for him while trying to thread a needle to try to split a hair and saying, hey, this guy did horrible things and Donald Trump is the reason why he did what he did, which might be true. But then they go and think, hey, you know PewDiePie? You know this YouTuber that this guy just randomly decided to spew out? Because we don't like him and because we are trying to do hit piece after hit piece for something that we took out of context, we're going to continue our agenda here. We're going to use the warm, dead bodies of these victims as a way to push our agenda even further. Do you realize for a second how sick and demented that is? How sick and disturbed that is? And yet, we're falling for it because of our sensitivities. We've heard PewDiePie do these things, to have this edgy humor, and to say some of these things which he had to walk back immediately. And because the media has played into our sensitivities and has jumped on this bandwagon and began to use tokenism in order to simulate that, hey, they are diverse now when they really are not. They have done nothing to prove that and have stuff. Instead, try to be overly preachy and shove this kind of stuff down your throat when they can find other ways in order to tell that same message in a way that is more organic in their entertainment and their news, or to hire people behind the scenes who are diverse and will have fresh ideas, or to pretend that just because someone is a majority race or majority gender that they don't care about those issues at all, or they won't want diversity at all. But because they have played to that so much, we are now overly sensitive before we even get the chance to hear his apologies. And no apology is ever going to be enough, because we're not going to let it be enough. We are going to want something more. We're going to be wanting something even more than what anybody could ever hope to give. In order to accept an apology, you have to give the person a chance to say that apology. You have to hear them out. You have to tell somebody, hey, I'm going to let you have a chance to say you're sorry, and to be able to keep an open mind to say, hey, you're not just saying this because you want to get out of a problem, but because you honestly do mean what you say. But you can't just dig your heels in and be closed-minded and say, no matter what you say, I'm going to find a way to say that you don't really mean it. And that is what's happening anymore with some of these people. And that, at least to me, is the most negative thing you could possibly do to somebody. Unfortunately, we do have some outlets that do try to tell people that that is the way you have to go. You have to ostracize people from your life if they even hint at a disagreement. And now I'm not talking about, oh, these people don't deserve to live or anything like that. I mean, these nuanced disagreements that are taking distinction of what is actually being said into account, of what is actually being argued. There's a lot of nuance here that we have to go through. We have to discuss further than what we would normally have to talk about. And unfortunately, we are not doing that. And unfortunately, that leads into something like this. Now, are we as a whole at fault for what happened on that day, on that Friday night? Perhaps, perhaps not. However, to blame one person just because a madman who probably just had the feeling of, I'm going to go do this day, and saying, you're the one who caused this, you might as well have been the one to pull the trigger, is unfair. Just because, hey, we made a little bit of mistakes along the way, or just because, hey, we don't like you because you're taken away from the people we do like. We can't afford to fall for that kind of trick, for that kind of rhetoric. Because let's be quite honest, do you honestly think there is a such thing as a right or left wing political terrorist? There is not, in the sense that I don't think terrorists have a distinct political mindset, as it were. I think they go for wherever would get them the most attention. And that is the ultimate troll. The one that will use physical force, physical violence in order to essentially get that attention. And in this case, he decided right-wing terrorism would be the way to go. But if Bernie Sanders or Beto O'Rourke were the popular people to hate at that point in time, would he align himself with them? Or with maybe a middle-of-the-road centrist, like maybe John Kasich? Whoever it might be would be the people that he would side with, because he wants the attention. A lot of these people want the attention. And that's why we say all the time to not give these types of people celebrity status. It's what they want. Now, in that sense, we also have to make sure we tell people we're not saying to not say anything about it at all, but to not glorify what they did. Because not only do you get copycats, not only do you get people saying, hey, that would make me popular, but you say to somebody, hey, we're going to give you what it is you wanted all along, which was the attention, the wall-to-wall coverage on cable networks, the constant showing of what he said, which was this whole manifesto, everything that went in between all that. And that's what we keep saying, don't feed the trolls. That's what we mean. It's not saying don't go to the police or anything like that. Don't completely ignore it. That's not at all what is being said. Is don't make them into celebrities. Don't make them into, okay, I'm going to give you all the attention in the world. I'm going to post everything you've ever said to everybody who I know. Do what you have to do in order to make sure that person is never going to bother you again. That the person learns a lesson one way or another, but don't make them into a celebrity, because that is what they want. You play into their game. Unfortunately, it is the media in this sense that wanted to play this game and use this as a way in order to further their agenda. And unfortunately, until we figure out what exactly is causing people to blindly believe anything that the media will tell them, as long it is something that confirms their already preconceived bias, as long as they don't let anybody else burst their bubble, we're never going to fix this. It goes alongside the gun legislation. It goes alongside that. If we can't get people to, at the very least, listen and stop blocking anybody on Twitter who dares to, even in the littlest bit, disagree with something that they've said on a political front about social issues, if they ostracize anybody who tries to find any nuance in something that they see as an absolute, then we're never going to be able to change to a point where we can get on the same page. We're not even in the same book. How can we be on the same page if we can't get to where the book is? That is something that we have to change now. And unfortunately, we can't get there if people will listen before talking. You don't have to be a conservative to be against outrage culture. You can be a progressive or a liberal and call out people on your side, as long as you're doing it constructively and with a bit of respect for other people. And that's all anybody ever has, is respect people long enough in order to hear what they have to say, because maybe they're just coming from a different perspective of things. Maybe they've seen other things that might say, hey, I agree with you with 90% of what you're saying, however, the execution is where you're becoming flawed. Or I agree with your fundamentals, but the way you're saying them, where you're getting where this kind of stuff is happening, is not where I'm seeing it. And that's where you have to have the discussion. And you should not shut anybody out like that who tries to find some kind of nuance with execution of these things. And I would like to close by reciting something from a Reddit post that I'm not quite sure where the Reddit post came from. I'm not going to reveal the name of the person who said this because I don't want them to get doxxed or anything like that, but I'm pretty sure that this is a Reddit post from the format that the screenshot is in. In this, he says, and I quote, "Actually, it matters a lot." Not sure who he's responding to, but whatever. The guy's manifesto makes it clear that he says subscribe to PewDiePie is because he wants to create division and conflict. He wants the media to go after PewDiePie and his fans, and he wants to accelerate the culture war. Everything about the attack was cultivated for that end, from the choice of victims to the weapons to the people he references. He knows Felix won't approve of his actions, and he knows Felix wants nothing to do with him. He is associating himself with PewDiePie because he wants to see Felix condemned with that association. He wants the mainstream media to run with the narrative that PewDiePie and his supporters are alt-right or fascist adjacent. If the media falls for the bait, then we'll see the murderer's ultimate plan fulfilled. YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook will likely be his unwitting pawns as they crack down on problematic people like PewDiePie. If this isn't addressed, then the murders will have not only been horrific crime, but they will have also been mission success from the perspective of the killers. They cannot be allowed to succeed. So it is actually important here that the regular combatants in this culture war lay down their weapons and refuse to fight over this. If they don't, then the killers will get exactly what they want. But sadly, maybe the media is wanting the same thing that the killer wanted all along. Maybe the killer read the media's mind, and that is a very, extremely scary thought. My name is Shady Shadow, and that just happened.